Hi, I'm Jules Ostara. Welcome to my home here in the Blue Ridge Mountains. This is my basement studio sanctuary. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to do a simple, playful tessellation pattern. I'm repurposing the cover from that watercolor paper pad. I'm not using the actual watercolor paper that was within it, but the cover, which is a little bit thinner than regular cardboard and similar to cardstock, but it was what I had convenient. I didn't have any cardstock handy. You could also repurpose a cereal box or other kind of box for this that's a thinner kind of cardboard. And I'm using a ruler to measure at the 2-inch point and the 4-inch point. I'm going to make 4-inch squares, and I'm going to make several at the same time just to use the whole piece that I have prepared here. You could just do a single 4-inch by 4-inch square. So I drew that line at the 2-inch mark so that I could fold it in half. And all the carpenters in my family have taught me to measure twice, cut once. Which isn't that important with inexpensive materials like this, but if you're doing construction, it's another matter. So I'm just folding it in half to make it easier to make the square for several at a time to cut them out. If a fold in the center of your tile would bother you, then you don't want to do that. I didn't do that for all of them, but I did do it for the first few. I've found from experience the more straight edges I have to work with, the better my results usually are, rather than trying to work in the center of a piece of paper to get 4 by 4 inches. So using the factory edges on 2 edges helps. And then here I'm just measuring 4 inches up and making a line there because I'm going to cut that to make the first 4 by 4 inch square there on the bottom. And this can be a great way if you have children or if you're a teacher to have kids practice measuring and cutting with inexpensive supplies. I worked in a Montessori classroom for a while, and then I homeschooled my kids for K through 12, so I have a lot of experience with that and frequently think of that. Yet, surprisingly, I don't recall ever doing this particular project in school, either when I was a child or when I was working in classrooms. For my purposes in this one, I'm not doing it for educational reasons, but for art, for myself, for exploring and experimenting. So there I'm using that first square as a guide for the next one. Makes it nice and easy. However, you still want to double check your measurements, especially if it were something more expensive substrate. In this case, again, it's not that important, but it's a good practice to be in, and it's one that I've mostly trained myself to do, though not always. Sometimes I get too excited and forget, but in this case I did double check my measurement before cutting so that I wasn't just relying on the guide that I used. Still, once you have your first guide, if it was a good cut and it's pretty even, then it can be used over and over and makes it easier, so you don't have to measure out every single one. I was not worried about perfection or being super precise for these, yet I still wanted it to be close enough that it wasn't going to throw the rest of the project completely out of whack when I got to the next steps. So I went ahead and marked out a few more squares that way and cut them because my piece was too big to fit in the paper cutter that I had handy. That's definitely another option and a quicker option if you have some paper cutters with a ruler to just go ahead and measure out your 4 by 4 squares that way, which is what I did for the rest of these with this sheet once I had it cleaned up got rid of that edge that was not going to be usable. And if you make several of these in advance, then you can have the extra squares with you to take on the go if you just want something that's a quick and easy project to make the actual pattern part, or to have ready for multiple kids and craft time. I made one that was a little smaller at the end just because I couldn't fit another bigger one. You just need a square, so they needed to be small enough to be able to fit several on a page, yet big enough to work with so that they wouldn't be too teeny tiny. So here I'm making my first pattern, and if this is your first time doing it, you may not want to follow exactly what I'm doing on this first one, but what I do on the later ones. I left it in to share with you because I believe in learning together and learning from others' mistakes. Learning what not to do is just as important as learning how to do something sometimes. So you should be working on two sides, two perpendicular. Like so here I'm working on two sides that are perpendicular to one another, and corner to corner. So I did not go all the way from one corner to the other corner with my half circles. It's okay. I figured out how to fix it, and it can actually add another dimension to the project if you do it this way with children, because you have to then measure to get it back over where it should have been. If it had been corner to corner, the top and the bottom where the circle was cut out and where the circle is now going to be taped onto the top would have been in alignment, since it would have been from corner to corner. In this case, because I came in a little bit, I have to measure the distance so that I make sure I put the top one the same distance in from the edge. On the right or left, I happen to measure the right, could do it either way, so that when you're making the repeat patterns, the top where one circle is will fit into the negative space, the part where it was cut out, on the pattern above it and the shape above it as you repeat it over and over. If it was not in the same distance from the edge, it wouldn't work out that way correctly. So this one still makes a cool pattern, and it's nice to know how to make a different type of pattern if you want to, so you're not confined by only going from corner to corner. So I had to do the same thing for this circle and measure the distance from the edge. As long as it's the same distance from the edge, then it will work out from top and bottom, where the hole from the circle cutout is in alignment with the circle being added to the other side, opposite side. So here is how it is supposed to be done most of the time. Corner to corner, make your shape from one corner to the other corner on two touching sides. And here's another example. I was experimenting with if I had a bigger space cut out or if I had a smaller space cut out. I wanted to play with lots of different things to get a better feel for my options and preferences. So on this one you can see that I'm cutting from one corner to the other, all the way across. The shape takes the entire side piece, and same with the second shape. And they had to be on those perpendicular sides so that then you can move it to the top, the opposite side. So the piece that I cut out from the bottom now moves up to the top and gets taped there. And then the piece that I cut from the right side will move to the left side and get taped there. And that way it will fill in, the piece that you cut out will fill in the next iteration of the shape each time it's repeating. And you can see how going from corner to corner makes it much easier to line it up, even though I still had to adjust it slightly because the way the tape had stuck was causing a little bit of an issue with that one. But if you cut it from corner to corner, then you can just line it up corner to corner, no distance to measure, like in the other one that I did. And one more example with a different sort of shape so that it's very obvious which one goes on which side after you cut them out, matching opposite sides there for the shape. So now choosing which one I was going to use, I chose this one. And from all the experiments I did, it seems you could pretty much start anywhere. I just chose to start in the upper left corner so that I could work at a diagonal shape. I was envisioning a little bit in advance, thinking I would prefer a diagonal shape or diagonal layout design with this particular shape. And I've laid tile in my home on the diagonal, usually kind of prefer it that way, so I was thinking of this as a different, unusually shaped tile, but you're doing the same thing. You could think of the pen marks as the grout line. So I am just using a pen that's readily available at pretty much any office supply aisle, school supply aisle. It's a Uniball pen, black ink. It is supposedly waterproof, and after it dries it does do pretty well that way. I'm not planning to use a lot of water on this one when I add the paint. I'm not going to come in with watercolor. I'm going to use an acrylic, so it's not as much of a concern, but you still don't want it blurring unless that's the effect you want. In some of my other videos, I come right in using the same pen and wet because I want the blurred effect that I get that way, but in this one, I'm not doing that. So you just continue lining up the edges from your guide as you repeat so that the marks you've already made are lining up with your original pattern, your original guide that you're using, and making the repetitive pattern. You do want to make sure, especially on the edges of the paper, that you're getting all of the areas like this little bit here and up here at the top, that you don't forget about those so that you don't end up with a corner that's not repeating along with all of the others. And here you can see that that side is not that distinct, so it was taking me a while to figure out where to place it over there to get it to line up properly. Eventually I finally figured out where I think it was supposed to. And then continuing until I have the rest of the page filled in before starting to paint. And I wasn't being too concerned about if I had a little goof with the pen here or there because I knew that I would probably end up painting over it. And now coming in with acrylic paint. These are pretty inexpensive brand acrylic paints that I'm doing for this, exploring how I might want to use color within the pattern, and I chose not to necessarily make it be exactly repeating like the same colors at the same sequence, you know, like every third one being this color in a particular direction. I decided not to plan that out and just trust what I liked, what colors felt like they wanted to go next, starting with this nice dark deep blue that I enjoy, and then choosing to put slightly lighter colors next to it. However, I wanted to keep the pattern somewhat monochromatic. I was going for cool, mostly cool colors in this one. It could even be like waves or ripples. I love thinking about ripple effects and watching ripples on the water. And I used to live in the islands in the Florida Keys, so the reef and going on out on the ocean there, you see lots of different colors. I think the color I'm using right here is actually called Key West. I'm not in the Keys now, but I have very fond memories of my time spent on the water and in the water there in the tropical waters. And so you do get lots of different colors when you're out on the ocean side, and some areas have a sandy bottom and some areas have shadow from the coral rock. And these two colors next to each other right here are reminding me of that. So often the choices that we make in our art may reflect our experiences, even on a subconscious level, even if we're not intentionally at the time. I was not thinking about that, but looking at it now as I'm adding the narration, that comes to mind. And so we can continue to explore even something as simple as this piece and this pattern in that way and let them kind of speak to us over time. I was thinking this one would make a nice either background for an art journal page or scrapbook paper, this particular pattern. And also if you were working in surface design and you have a different piece that has more story or more figurative aspects such as animals or botanicals with these similar colors, then this can be almost like a calming, coordinating piece, fabric design to go with it. So there are many different ways you can use something like this. You could also choose to embellish the shapes if they start to look like something specific to you, such as birds or fish. Then you could embellish each one in its own interesting way. At this point, I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was enjoying the act of painting this slow. I was taking it slow and enjoying the motions and the colors in an almost meditative, calming way. So far I've used all different colors. I do end up repeating some of the colors. You could use all the same color for the interior of the shape if you gave them each a different border, or a different border than what the inside is, so that you could still distinguish between the shapes. So you don't need to have as much variety in the color. You can play with all different ways of how you use color within it to see what you enjoy. So I could have come back over all of the edges, all of the borders, say in a gold, and I could have filled them all in with teal, and that could have been the entire color palette, which would have then made it very easy if you wanted to line it up for a repeat pattern. If you do all of the same color for the interior and the borders, then you're going to be able to line it up easily that way. If you're doing it different and with no plan and no sequence like I am, then they're not going to line up as at the same place. The same colors aren't going to line up, even though you could line up your repeating pattern. I was just going with the flow with this one, which feels appropriate now that I'm thinking of waves and ripples. I think this color might even be called Lagoon. You could think of them as different islands. The green over there is reminding me of seagrass. Now I think this is maybe a sky blue that I'm coming in with, so I did not repeat a color yet. So I used at least 6 different colors on this one before I started repeating some. And I wasn't worrying too much about coloring inside the lines. You can tell I went a little over on a few of the edges, enjoying the process, and I often enjoy that handmade look, that imperfections, the little bits of things like that mean it was handmade, add an energy that I appreciate. So I'm finally repeating a color over there in that corner, and will continue filling in all of the rest of the spaces. I explore patterns and using them in collage and composition in a completely different way for my session in A Year in Color, if you'd like to join me for that, along with several other artists. And I turned it upside down here just so my arm wouldn't be reaching over the wet paint. A few finishing touches to clean it up, and voila, the finished piece. I hope you enjoy whatever you're making along with me. Try some interesting, cool shapes and let yourself play. You can hit subscribe to join me for future adventures, or visit thrivetrue.com.